drops below full employment, that creates price pressure. The prices start to rise, so instead of having 2% inflation, which we had since 1950 or so, we get 3%, then we get 4%, then we get 5%, then we get a little more, and people are starting to get a little nervous about this. And the expectations of future inflation start to change, and so for those of you who had your 100B, that as those expectations of future inflation change, that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, so the actual inflation starts to change, so the inflation rate starting to rise, and eventually, not straight away, but eventually, circa around 1970, the Fed says, uh-oh, more or less. And the Fed starts to increase interest rates. They really start increasing interest rates in an effort to try to beat down some of this inflation. So we get some of the initial increases in interest rates here, where the top line is home mortgages, the thick line is 10-year treasuries, and the bottom line is 3-month treasuries, where interest rates start to increase a little bit here in the early 1970s, and then very much so, and this is a big part of the story, here in the late 1970s. So by 73, 74, we have what they're calling double-digit inflation, which means the inflation rate is greater than 10. There's 2 digits to the number, a 10's digit and a 1's digit. The pressure is on the Fed to do something. The Fed in October of 1979 said, we are going to have a money rule as opposed to an interest rate rule. We're going to let the money supply grow at a certain percent per month. And if that makes interest rates go astronomically high, so be it. We're going to do this. If that's what it takes to get rid of the inflation, that's what we're going to do. All of which is to say, very briefly, really high inflation in the 1970s was followed by really high interest rates on the part of the Fed. That's the takeaway from those last 18 sentences that I spit out really quickly. Really high inflation, which is a post-Vietnam effect. Really high inflation leads to the Fed jacking up interest rates very, very high. So that by 1980, we have home mortgage rates of 17%, which is outrageous. All right, so let's see how these higher interest rates play in the story. Take it back to the early 1970s. Money market mutual funds are developed in the early 1970s. Interest rates have begun to rise, but the amount of interest that you, so in this story you are always going to be you a customer, the amount of interest that you a customer can earn on your deposits is still limited by these federal regulations. And so interest rates are going up, and the interest that you can earn at the bank is not changing. And so some people figure out this concept of money market mutual funds. The idea is that they're going to take a little bit of money from a whole lot of people. They're going to pool that together. So I'm going to take $100 from each of you, and I'm going to put it into one big pool, and then I'm going to take that pool of funds, and I'm going to use that pool of funds to buy United States treasuries. I'm going to use that to buy the treasury notes and bills and bonds that are being issued by the federal government at these now higher interest rates. Right, so I'm going to take a little bit of money from each person. I'm going to use that to buy these treasury bills and bonds and notes, some of which have like a $10,000 minimum purchase dollar amount. And then I'm going to pay out, I'm the company that's doing this, I'm going to give you back most of the interest that we earn on that shared bond. So it's going to allow individuals with just a little bit of money up front to receive those really high interest rates that are being paid by the government on those securities. They're called money market mutual funds. So we're just taking our money, we're going to pool it together. The company in charge, Vanguard, Templeton Fund, whatever, is going to take the pooled money, buy a whole bunch of treasuries with it. They're going to give most of the interest back to us. They're going to keep a little bit for them to cover administrative costs and give them some profit, because why do this financial innovation if there's not some sort of profit maximizing motive for doing it? And here's the sweet part. We're going to let people withdraw funds from these money market accounts really easily. So we'll come up with this negotiated order of withdrawal. Looks a lot like a check. You know, it's about the same size as a check, says pay to the order of on it, has a date line, has a place where you fill in words the dollar amount, has a place where you sign it, has a memo line. Looks like a check to me. Has a little thing in small print that says minimum check amount is X. So minimum check amount $500, minimum check amount $1,000, something like that. So people are able to withdraw funds very easily from these money market mutual funds, but they can't use them to pay $10 bills, right? You can't write a check for $10.74. You have to withdraw at least $1,000 or $500 at a time. Very happy customers. Very happy customers because the customers are now able to make really good interest by putting their savings not in those passbook savings account at the savings and loan, but by putting their savings in these money market mutual funds. And they're not buying risky stuff with it. They're buying IOUs that have been issued by the United States government, which has never defaulted on its debt. So it seems to be risk-free, as good as putting your funds into a savings and loan, but it's earning you, the customer, a much higher interest rate. Who wouldn't do it? Yeah. They're very short term. They're not buying 30-year bonds. They're mostly buying 90-day to 1-year treasuries. Yeah. Sometimes I use bonds the right way to refer to long term, and sometimes I use it just as a generic U.S. Treasury. So, okay. Very unhappy bankers. Why are the bankers unhappy? Which set of bankers are unhappy? The credit union bankers, the savings and loan bankers, or the commercial bankers? Savings and loan. So the people running the savings and loans are very unhappy. Why are they unhappy? Because you've withdrawn your funds from the savings and loan and used those very funds to buy these money market mutuals. So people start taking their funds, they start withdrawing all what they have, or most of what they have in the savings and loan, and going off and using that to buy money market funds. It's great for the customers. Customers are now getting a higher rate of return than they were when they had their savings passbook account at the savings and loan. But now the savings and loan banker doesn't have any funds to lend, because the way in which those savings and loan bankers make that profit is by making loans. The way in which they make the loans is by lending out the funds that you had deposited in their institution. All right, so what happens? Well, the 1933 Banking Act had said no member bank shall directly or indirectly by any device whatsoever, I love that, pay any interest on any deposit which is payable on demand. This is sort of like under no circumstances whatsoever, ever, no. I said no, it's no. It's like by no device, by any interest on any deposit which is payable on demand. Ooh. On demand. Aha! Smart people eventually figure out what's the loophole here. Financial innovation. These are bankers. Their incentive is to make profit. There's rules that are put up in front of them. For a long time, they're happy with the rule that limits how much they can pay out on deposits, because that's the whole 363 banking thing, that they were going to pay out 3%, they were going to charge 6% and go banking at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They had a wonderfully boring, profitable life. Until some fool came along and invented these money market mutual funds, and that just messed up their life altogether, because all the funds start being withdrawn from the savings and loans. So somebody figures out, page man, there I am, this on-demand part. So first thing, before the smart, clever person comes along, I have to look at my notes and not get ahead of my story, is the banks start trying to compete with each other. So you could withdraw your funds and put them in a money market fund and make, say, 6 or 7%. Or you could keep your funds at the Washington Mutual Savings and Loan, and they'll give you a toaster. Or they'll give you a set of steak knives. Or they'll give you some other goodie. Because those goodies, this toasters, I mean, literally, you would get toasters, you would get steak knives, you would get all sorts of wonderful things like that at the bank for bringing in your deposits and depositing funds at the bank, because they couldn't compete on the basis of interest, and so they found some other way to compete. So they compete by offering out toasters. You can get a better toaster at Bank of America than you can get at Wells Fargo. But you can get steak knives at Wells Fargo. Right? Then we get the clever person. The clever person who goes back and says, oh, wait. They say payable on demand. What if the deposit is not payable on demand? What if it is payable with a couple of days lag? That's the difference between a checking account, a demand deposit, and a savings account with something that looks like a check attached to it. They call them negotiable order of withdrawal. They start in 1970s in New England. They spread throughout the country in 1980, and the limit on the interest that can be paid on these things is removed in 1986. The negotiable order of withdrawal looks, smells, and feels like a check. It says pay to the order of. It has a place where you write the amount. You sign on the bottom. There's no minimum to how much you can write it for, but it's linked to an account that's technically, legally, not a demand deposit because the bank has held back the right to say, we will not necessarily honor this request for withdrawal for 3 days or 5 days. So they say, this is an order of withdrawal. You've asked us to withdraw these funds from your account. We will do so after 5 days, so it's not on demand, thereby getting around that part of the rule. It's not on demand. It's not you walk up and say, I want my money, and they're going to have to give it to you right then and there. You write this thing out, and they will eventually honor that order of withdrawal, but they're going to wait 5 days. Voila. We have created a financial instrument that looks, smells, and feels like a check, pretty much works the same way as a check, but gets around the regulation Q requirements. Go. Yeah, next.
So basically, it's basically saying that they can't pay because on the order of withdrawal that the people
The 1933 Banking Act is saying that banks, so that one said commercial, the Banking Act itself says that banks cannot pay interest on the funds that are held in checking accounts. The difference between a checking account and a savings account is a checking account, you can go in and you can say, I want my money and I want it now, and by law they have to give it to you. That's the on-demand part. A savings account, you may feel like I've got this account at a savings and loan and I ought to be able to go in and say, give me my funds back right now, I want them. And most of the times that you went into the savings and loan and asked for your funds, they would give it to you, but they had the legal right to make you wait.
So this prevented them from competing with the regulation.
Yes. So the Banking Act, which is formalized in Regulation Q, which then extends it to beyond just the commercial banks. The Banking Act, which is formalized in Regulation Q, says that makes it impossible for the financial institutions to compete with the money market mutual funds. Because Regulation Q said these types of accounts, saving passbooks, can have interest, but we're going to limit what the interest rate is. Does that help? Okay, cool. Sam. Is this a reaction to the, I doubt it. Is this a reaction to the development of checks in the 1870s? I wouldn't expect there to be that kind of historical memory. So I don't know the good answer, but I would be very surprised if it's a reaction to the development of checks in the 1870s, because that would take a 50-year, 2-generation historical memory, and that's more than I would expect out of regulators and legislators. Is that, no. Okay. Regulation Q, the one that had limited how much can be paid and by what institutions, fully repealed just 2 years ago. So July 2011 is a complete and total repeal of Regulation Q. All right. So this allows the financial institutions to start paying interest on deposits. They don't have interest on checking accounts, but they do have interest on these negotiated order of withdrawal, which most people didn't know the difference between a now account and a checking account. So most people had a now account without realizing it was a now account instead of a checking account. What's the next piece? So now the problem is that these financial institutions are now trying to compete with these money market funds by paying higher interest rates. You no longer get toasters. All the toasters are gone. All the steak knives are gone. You no longer get toasters and steak knives. Now they offer you higher rates of interest on your deposits. And so they start competing on price, basically, on what price they're going to pay their depositors. But assets and liabilities, costs and revenues, they're now paying a higher interest rate on their liabilities, on the deposits. They're paying out, they have higher costs. If they're going to stay afloat, they need higher revenues as well. Their revenues come from making loans. So things are going along pretty much okay, except then, let me skip a slide. But then we get this really high rates of interest here, beginning in the early 1980s, right? So it's the same picture that we had. So when I was in graduate school, I started graduate school in 1978, I had a money market fund, and I still have the statements from my money market fund. I was making 16% interest on my savings. That was just a run-of-the-mill money market fund. Anybody could have had it. But I was making 16%, which is why I saved that thing, because I had enough foresight to realize I was never going to see that kind of rate of return again. So 16, 17, 15, 16, 17% interest for a couple of 3 years there in graduate school. That was phenomenal, right? I mean, exactly. And so the financial institutions are trying to compete with that. So I can say, look, I can get 16% down at the Franklin Fund. How much is the bank going to pay me? The bank's going to try to compete. Now, if the bank's paying out 16% on its deposits, it needs to try to make that up on its loans. But who's going to borrow for a long-term loan anyway if they got to pay 16%? I know. I don't know how they did it, but I got 16% on my money market fund. Yep. Yeah. Inflation then is it's around 10. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good real rate of return too. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Nobody thought that interest rates were going to stay at 16% forever. Okay. So what do we get? We get these. Oh, sorry.
So I just have a question about the on-demand part.
Yep.
Logistically, so basically the Banking Act makes it illegal to pay interest if you're going to look at and you go back to the bank. It kind of would be giving money interest right now. So then it would go back like.
No, the on-demand part describes your account. So accounts that are on demand are checking accounts because you have the right to withdraw your funds as soon as you walk in the bank and you ask for your funds. Legally, they have to give them to you.
Right. But then it's like now they can pay interest not on demand. Right?
No, it's not whether they pay the interest on demand. It's is this account, which is my checkbook, is this checking, imagine my checkbook is here, is this an on-demand account, which means I can walk into the institution and say, I've got $1,000 in here, I want my $1,000, and they by law have to give it to me when I ask for it. That's on demand. Whether they pay interest on an annual basis or a monthly basis or a daily basis doesn't matter. They were not allowed to pay interest on the funds in this on-demand account. Then I have my passbook account, imagine my passport here. Then I have my passbook account where I can go into the savings bank and say, I want the funds, I can go into Bailey Building and Loan and say, I want the funds that are in this account. By law, they don't have to give them to me right away. They can say, yep, we will, but by law, we have 30 days to give it to you. Those are the accounts they could pay interest on. Yeah. All right. So adjustable rate mortgages. So they're paying banks, financial institutions are paying out these really high rates of interest, particularly savings and loans, right? Regulation Q still is in force for commercial banks. So the commercial banks are not able to pay these higher interest rates. The savings and loans are paying these higher interest rates, but now they're really getting screwed because they're paying really high interest rate on deposits, but they're not earning very high interest on the loans because most of the loans that the savings and loans are carrying on their books are home mortgages that they've made over the last 15 or 20 years, and they've made those things at 3, 4, 5, and 6%, and they're paying out 16%. That's not good. You can't pay out 16% and earn 5% and expect to stay in business very long. They want to make mortgages. The problem is that the mortgage rates are 16%. And nobody in their right mind wants to take out a mortgage at 16%. The standard loan at that time is a 30-year fixed rate, fully amortized loan with a 20% down payment. That's the standard loan. So this is how it works. If you're going to buy a $125,000 house, you need to have 20% down. So 20% of 125 is $25,000. So you're going to have $25,000 upfront cash, and then you can borrow the rest. You can borrow the 80%. So you can borrow $100,000. You borrow $100,000 probably at 6%. You'd have a 30-year, fully amortized fixed rate mortgage. It means that every month you pay exactly the same amount as you paid the month before. So I did that. I used a little loan calculator online yesterday. You would pay $599.55 each month. Initially, most of that $599 would be an interest payment, and a little bit would go towards paying off the $100,000. By the end of the 30 years, most of that $599 would be a principal payment, paying down the amount that you owe, and a little bit would be the interest payment. And they set it up so that by the time you finish your 360th payment of $599.55, you will have fully paid off that $100,000. So fully amortized means that you're not going to wind up at the end of 30 years with a balloon payment, which is how they had mortgages set up in the 20s. You're not going to wind up where all of a sudden you still owe the $100,000. Every month you're paying some interest and some principal, paying down the balance, so that at the end of the 30 years you don't owe anything. You own the house free and clear. Except that at 16%, that would be a really expensive mortgage. So if you borrowed $100,000 at 16%, instead of $599.55, your mortgage payment would be $1,344.76. That's a huge difference, right? It's more than twice as expensive to borrow at 16% as it is to borrow at 6%. So what would people do? They would get an adjustable rate mortgage. The adjustable rate mortgage would start out at current interest rates of 10%. And they would make these payments, and each payment would be some interest and some principal, so they'd be paying down the balance on the loan. And then periodically, the interest rate would adjust, and that's why it's called an adjustable as opposed to a fixed rate mortgage. The interest rate adjusts or changes periodically, and let's suppose that after 5 years of paying at 16%, suppose interest rates had fallen to 10%. In that case, the monthly payment's going to fall from $1,300 to $899. So this is a good deal for a borrower, because a borrower who is borrowing when rates are really high, so if you're borrowing when rates are 16%, you don't want a fixed rate mortgage. You don't want to pay $1,344 every month for 30 years. You want to be able to take advantage of those lower interest rates when interest rates actually fall, so that you can reduce your monthly payment. So an adjustable rate mortgage is a really good deal for a borrower when rates are high and are expected to fall. Just a second. They're not such a good deal for the lender. The lender would love to lock you in at 16% for 30 years, but the lender can't get any business, right? If mortgage rates are 16%, nobody wanted to borrow and be stuck for 30 years at 16% because everybody knew that that 16% was a temporarily high interest rate.
That originally, like the savings loans, they had a 6% interest rate.
Yep.
But they had a match 16% that was happening through
Yep.
the rest of the world. So they had to jack up their
the rate that they charged, right?
So the only way to get actually people to do that though is use the adjustable rate so that when their interest rate fell, so they're paying.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just repeat what you just said. That the banks initially had been charging 6% on loans. When they started having to pay out 16% on deposits, they wanted to also charge at least 16% on loans. They couldn't find any customers at 16%, and so they offered these adjustable rate mortgages where the interest rate that the borrower pays will fall as the interest rates in the economy fall. Yeah, exactly. Sam.
So this is still before the bank is tied to like LIBOR or
Yep. Yeah. How do they decide what the interest rate? So the different contracts would say the interest rate is tied to something. So they might tie it. They wouldn't tie it to LIBOR. They would tie it to a 10-year Treasury or a 3-month Treasury. They usually tie it to some sort of Treasury rate. So they had things that they would tie it to so that you could. And then they had a certain. You could only adjust. It would only adjust a certain number of times. It would only adjust no more than every say 6 or 12 months. There were regulations. But
it's tied to the same rate that they're paying off.
yeah. So it's tied to a rate that's linked to what they're paying out. Peter. This is all nominal. This is all I just pulled. I just dropped it into the payment calculator yesterday. So the one reason the money, I think this is where you're going. One reason the money market funds are so competitive is that their interest rates were updated daily, right? And the interest rate that you were paid at the bank, well, the bank wasn't paying interest. Interest that you were paid at the savings and loan, those things are updated very infrequently. Yeah. So they didn't have anything where they adjusted the interest rate every day. Was that part of your question? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One more. Right. Why would customers take out and why? This is the question I asked my niece. Why would customers take out an adjustable rate mortgage if they thought that interest rates were stable? There's no incentive. Why would customers take out an adjustable rate mortgage when interest rates are abnormally low? Right. I hope I'm going to get to that. Because that was part of the puzzle of the first 2000 to 2005, was we had really low interest rates and a lot of people taking out adjustable rates. I'll get to that. Okay. So the banks, the savings and loans, I say banks here, but I really mean savings and loans, so let me fix that. The savings and loans need really high return assets because they're now trying to compete with these money market mutual funds by paying really high rates of interest on deposits. They've got some of these adjustable rate mortgages, but they still have a whole lot of their assets that are tied up in fixed rate mortgages that they've made over the last 25 years. Because at this time, S&Ls, they carried these loans on their books. They didn't, this whole like bundling them up and selling them off on the market, that wasn't part of the deal. So what else do we get going on? Well, this is at the beginning of the leveraged buyout time. So leveraged buyouts, really quickly. The LBOs, which were popular in the beginning 1980s, there would be companies. KKR was one that was very well known for doing this. Kravis, Kohlberg, and Roberts. Evil people who caused the unemployment of my brother, who subsequently died. Anyway, he did die. I didn't mean to say that funny, but he did die. But I think of them as evil people because they caused his unemployment. So KKR, what they would do was there are people who will borrow. They'll take a whole bunch of money. They'll borrow money from who knows whom. The whom is going to be the S&Ls. They're going to borrow money from who knows whom in order to buy up the stock of a company. And that's the leveraged buyout. So they're not using actual money, they're using borrowed money to buy out a company. They're buying out these companies because they believe the firms are undervalued. The firms are undervalued either because there's some efficiencies that have not been put into place that could lower the cost. So this is the same capital asset pricing model equation that we saw with slavery and that we saw with education. So that firms are undervalued either because there are some obvious cost savings that could be implemented that would increase the value of the firm, or the firm is undervalued because the pieces of the firm are worth more than the firm as a whole.